he came face to face with insomnia. And he was telling his story about his experience with insomnia and how he would like be up at 3 a.m. and go into the backyard and just start screaming. And that, I think, planted the seed of fear in my head that insomnia was scary and that not sleeping enough for some specified amount of time could potentially result in insomnia later in life. It was all consuming for me. Like that was my personal experience. It's not the experience that everybody has, but for me, it was like the thing, like if I couldn't get over this thing, then my life was over. Like that was how I perceived it. And so it became, the only thing that I was thinking about and the thing that I had to fix in order to move on with my life. Like having to go through it was the thing that kind of like made me see, I think, seeing the lessons of self-kindness through different ways or different experiences. It really like solidified that lesson for me. And for anybody who might be like struggling with that, like maybe just like start looking inward and asking yourself questions. And when you are experiencing anxiety or depression or other types of suffering, like start really asking yourself like why and where is that coming from, and start digging deep and asking yourself if you are just not giving yourself enough grace.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another really special Talking Insomnia episode. We have Jamie with us. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you.
So nice to have you, Jamie. And for those of you who don't know Jamie, which is probably most of the audience, you were a member of our Insomnia Immunity program. But this episode has a little bit of a kind of a special story behind it. There was a guest on here a few weeks ago. Her name was Marina. And when she told her story, she mentioned that the first kind of helpful step towards leaving her struggle was finding your YouTube channel, where you had sort of in a kind of vlog style documented your own journey through insomnia. And that's and when she said that, I was like, oh, I got to tell Jamie this. And I told you, and then I was like, why don't I invite Jamie? And so here we are. So that's a little backstory. But with that said, thanks so much for being here, and tell us how you started having trouble sleeping.
Yeah, thanks, Coach, for letting me or inviting me on and telling my story. It is a little bit of a longish story, but try to keep all the main points intact. So in 2017, I volunteered to do this thing that required like some night shift type stuff and also some day shift type stuff, and it was like 5 or 6 days long. And I did not get as much sleep as I would have liked to get. And I really didn't like how sleep deprived I felt as a result of doing this thing that I volunteered to do. And so I think it was later that same year, I was listening to an episode of Hidden Brain, and Shankar Vedantam was interviewing Randy Gardner. And for those of you who don't know, Randy Gardner is the world record holder for the longest time that a human has ever been awake, which is like 11 days long or something like that. And he, in the interview, he was talking about how, he went through this experiment as a teenager. And like 50 years later, he came face to face with insomnia. And he was telling his story about his experience with insomnia and how he would like be up at 3 a.m. and go into the backyard and just start screaming. And that, I think, planted the seed of fear in my head that insomnia was scary and that not sleeping enough for some specified amount of time could potentially result in insomnia later in life. That was the message that I took away from that. And then fast forward a couple of years, I was out of town for an extended amount of time for work. And so I was sleeping in a hotel. My sleep was a little bit disrupted because of that. And I started waking up every night at the same time. I thought it was kind of strange. And that seed of fear started to grow. And my sleep got kind of worse and worse every night. And I was sleeping like less than I had ever slept before. It was probably like 3 to 6 hours a night. Like it wasn't like that little sleep, but it felt like that little sleep to me at the time. And it really scared me. And so I was at a point where I didn't feel like I could handle it. I told my boss I have to go home and deal with this problem. And so I did. And I found a sleep therapist, a CBT-I therapist. I went to our first session, and he, did the evaluation, like, how long have you been dealing with this? And, these are all your sleep hygiene check boxes. Are you doing this, this, and this, and this? And here's your CBT-I workbook, and this is how you do stimulus control, and let's start with this. And so, I worked through the workbook. It was a lot of like how do you think about this, and how could you think about this differently, like, and not catastrophize, and like all the regular CBT things that anybody who's familiar with CBT is familiar with at this point. And so I kind of went through this process of trying to understand what was going on. And that lasted a few months. I also said, I think I asked him at our first session, like, is my circadian rhythm just broken now? Like, am I just broken? And he said, no, that's not a thing. So, and I believed him, and he was right. So I kind of got past that first hurdle of thinking there was something like physically wrong with me pretty early in the process. But I was still in a place where I desperately did not want to be, just because I was suffering so much. And so I was doing a lot of online research. I came across Martin Reed's threads of folks talking about their experiences with CBT-I and insomnia and how they were doing. And I became a pretty active participant in that. And I found Guy Meadows' book. I think it's called the Sleep Book, right?
Yep.
And that really helped demystify a lot of what was going on, like from an evolutionary standpoint, and just like sort of some of the physical things that I was going through. Like, I didn't understand what hypnic jerks were until I read that book, and it explained it. And I was like, oh, it just helped it. It helped me make sense of it more, of what I was going through. And I was also on some like various medications. Like I tried like clonazepam and trazodone and some other things. And I made it a big lofty goal of mine to like get off the medication. And then I was going to try sleep restriction. And it was a lot of like trial and error type of stuff for a few months. And I remember my CBT-I therapist getting a little frustrated with me for not like picking a plan and sticking to it. Even though like really all I was doing was just trying to figure things out.
And sorry to interrupt, Jamie, but at this point, how impacted are you in terms of your life? Is this kind of like an all-consuming thing? You're thinking about it all the time, or not really? Yeah. And work and things of that nature. How things in general?
It was all-consuming for me. Like that was my personal experience. It's not the experience that everybody has, but for me, it was like the thing. Like if I couldn't get over this thing, then my life was over. Like that was how I perceived it. And so it became, the only thing that I was thinking about, and the thing that I had to fix in order to move on with my life. And so I was very solution oriented and very goal oriented. And the CBT-I puts everything in a framework that kind of allows you to act and take those steps and work strictly within this framework, which some people do find helpful, by the way. For the audience's knowledge, I'm not, trying to say it doesn't work for some people, but it put it in terms that like I could understand best at that time, which is just if I follow these rules, I'll fix the problem. And so I think it was October 2019 that I decided I was gonna like really follow my sleep restriction plan and hold myself accountable. And I was gonna do these video blogs. I think in part to, well, definitely in part to share my experience with people, because I'd encountered other people on YouTube and other parts of the internet that documented their experiences. And I was coming back to those as resources a lot for inspiration. And so I wanted to also show my journey to other people that might find it helpful. And I also think I was doing it a little bit to hold myself accountable, because if I had this big audience, then like I'm accountable to all these people who are like waiting to see like what would happen to me. And miraculously, even with all that pressure that I was putting on myself, it kind of worked like a charm, exactly the way, like the textbook way that it's like supposed to work. I think for a couple weeks I was like in this like kind of like 4 to 5 hour range, and then I slowly like was like getting 6 hours of sleep, and then 6 hours and 15 minutes, and then 6 hours and 30 minutes, and it was just like little by little I was just sort of ushering insomnia out the door. And so I was like, well, like, cool, like I guess that worked, and if it happens again I could just go for sleep restriction again. But I also at the same time remember thinking like, I can't believe I got away with that. It doesn't like there was still a piece that was missing, and I knew it deeply, but I didn't entirely understand it. And so fast forward again to 2023, I had started taking a new medication. I think it was Wellbutrin, and it was keeping me up at night a little bit, and I just found myself back in the spiral. And my head was spinning, and I was like, okay, like I'm gonna do sleep restriction. I'm gonna do this many hours a night. No, I'm gonna like do this many, and it's gonna like I'll stick with it for how blah, blah. And like my brain just like went into that problem solving mode. In part, I think because I knew it wasn't gonna work this time. And like it didn't work that time. And so I found myself sort of at a loss. And I also was familiar with your channel back in 2019, because you also talked about CBT-I a lot, and you had people on that were like talking about their experiences with that. And so I knew about you and your content, and so I ran back to your content pretty quickly, because I knew that there was going to be a lot of solidarity and helpful information. But I still wasn't ready to go through like the acceptance aspect of things, because you probably remember when I started the program, I like said that, you know, like sleep restriction is still like my first priority here, and I'm just kind of here as a backup plan or something like that. That was my thinking at the time. And then so like, yeah, I decided I was going to join the program. It felt like the right thing to do. I knew so much, but I was still looking for so many answers. And the sleep the Insomnia Immunity program and the coaches and the other students, like everything I learned from everybody, it really was like the pivotal moment, I think, that defined my journey and like solidified my understanding of what I was going through. And so I really began the process of recovery then. I think it was one class or one group session, that I said, like, it doesn't matter how much I sleep, I'm still struggling. And I think you said, well, I think that, you know, highlights an important point, because it's not really about sleep. And of course, I've heard this several times before, But I think that was the point. It became a light bulb moment, and it made me go, huh. And then I started really allowing myself to untangle everything.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks so much for sharing that. And there was some echo here. I'm going to just lower my volume, but I remember, I will start there. I remember being on a call, maybe the first call where I met you, and I still see like the Zoom screen. You were up in the top left corner, and I remember you talking about how CBT-I was helpful the first time around, and you were like, so therefore, it's really hard for me to kind of let go of this like sleep restriction. Like I still want to restrict my sleep. I still want to go to bed late and get up early, right? And so I do remember that. And it's very natural when we, at some point, we think that was the thing that led us to relief. And now we're struggling again. So of course we want to kind of hold on to that. And so let's actually start there. And the first time, interestingly, you had used kind of sleep restriction. You found kind of the result everybody's promising, but somehow you were still kind of skeptical. It was sort of like, this was a little too easy. There's some part of this missing. And if somebody would tell me that story, I would be like, okay, the part missing here is probably somehow that, the part about like how the brain has kind of mislabeled being awake as a threat and as trying to escape that threat. And it's not really the sleep restriction that helps. It's more like maybe having a therapist that we trust, or maybe doing something that we believe will help, and just somehow the brain sees like, okay, maybe there's not so much of a threat here. That's kind of magic. But looking back, was something like that kind of the missing piece, or what do you recognize in hindsight as kind of the missing piece?
Like during the time between like episodes of insomnia when I was
that first time when you sleep restriction kind of worked, but you were still deep down inside, you were like, wow, how did it work? What's going on? Something is missing. What would you say was missing?
I think, well, I think what was ultimately missing was like the context in which you frame insomnia, in so far that it is like a phobia, right? And just like seeing it from that perspective, and not seeing it from the perspective as like sleeplessness is a problem to be fixed, because that was still kind of my mindset. Not because I was like scared of any health outcomes, just because like I was afraid for my mental health. I think that was like how I was seeing it as a problem. Like I can't like I'm not strong enough to not sleep, kind of a mentality. And then when I joined the program and I started understanding the teachings and like the framings of like what the challenge really is, like, and how you start to understand it, like first as like a fear of not sleeping, and then as a fear of feeling anxious in the body, and then ultimately as like a fear of failure and not being able to like trust myself, or like whatever that means, or have enough faith in myself to go through something hard. And like that's where you all talk about like these layers, I think. And I think another piece of it that really untangled it I forget the word, it like detached
do you mean this like the delegation?
No, I'm going a different direction a little bit.
Not being so attached to the outcome,
what diffused insomnia for me was like explaining it in terms of like biology and like how the brain works and why the brain does what it does and why we get scared, and just like understanding like neuro pathways and things like that, that made it more of like it made the whole thing seem more possible to get out of, as like just by way of learning to have new reactions based on the new knowledge that I have in my head, which, like you all say, doesn't really require effort. It just requires you to be. And so I think those like different sort of ways of putting it helped me to understand it a lot better, for sure, which I think was like the biggest missing piece, but also just witnessing classmates go through this process and seeing it before my own eyes, how people just transformed from being in this state of like panic to like still not sleeping, but like feeling almost normal. And when I witnessed that, I was like, oh, like that's what I want. I want to be a superhero that like, you know, does what she needs to do, even though she's going through all this suffering and like transforming also.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And speaking of which, you know, you were mentioning this kind of pivotal moment, or this moment when things kind of clicked, something you'd heard before, but it clicked for you differently when you know, when I talked about how, you know, when you said something like, if I sleep like a lot or a little, it still doesn't matter. I kind of feel the same. And then I think I said something along the lines of, well, that's in some way it is helpful to know, because then you see that it's not about sleep, right? And why that can be so helpful, I think, is that when we see that, it goes from being like, the mindset goes from being like, okay, I just got to have more sleep so I can at least feel okay tomorrow, to like, oh, it doesn't actually matter so much how much I sleep. And that can be so freeing and relieving. Was it, can you talk more about that? Was that kind of what helped, or in what way was that helpful?
Yeah, I think that kind of sums it up pretty well. I mean, it was just like one of those like little aha moments that made me like I became goal oriented, or I was goal oriented towards getting more sleep initially. And then once I kind of hit that first like pivot, I became goal oriented towards like doing really well despite how much I sleep, or just like being like these other people that I'm seeing who are like just living their lives in spite of whatever they're experiencing at night or during the day, for that matter. And I really decided I was just gonna like go through day to day as normally as I could. Like I went to the office every day. I didn't have to go to the office every day, but I chose to go to the office every day because I wanted to be in a different physical environment than just my apartment. And I went to my martial arts classes, I think most weekdays. A lot of it was like going through the motions, especially early on, but I was like, I'm just gonna go through the motions and like go to my weightlifting classes and sort of retain what I can from these classes, even though my head's not really maybe 100% in it. Well, it definitely wasn't in it, but it was just like a matter of going through those motions for a while, and then like really like getting back to those habits of doing those everyday things, while also taking care of myself when I felt like I needed to be by myself. And like I bought myself like a Nintendo Switch during that time, and I just started playing Animal Crossing and like other like very bright video games that kind of like lifted my mood a little bit. But I feel like I might be trailing from your initial question. But like I think yeah, like it just became a matter of like, oh, I just need to like live my life day to day as well as I can, and also take care of myself as well as I can during this time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, you know, that in my mind, I'm thinking like that's, I think anything that takes us away from like sleep being the goal, really helpful. And then like when the goal becomes more like, I'm just going to live my life regardless of how I sleep, generally very helpful. Sometimes, of course, we can, you know, we can push ourselves so much in that direction too. Did you find that happen for you or not? Yeah.
I don't think I was pushing myself too hard to do things. I was trying to find the right balance, but I also recognized that it was still a goal that I was trying to achieve. Like I was trying so hard to be like okay and like feel normal. But I also recognized that as like, well, is that even really like the ultimate, like is that even something that I have control of, or can I just practice that self-kindness that we talked about all the time. I remember, I forget her name, but there was one person that was training to be a sleep coach who was like a metacognitive behavioral therapist.
Yeah, Sissy?
Yeah. I remember her saying in the chat one time in the Slack chat, like remember, like a lot of like depression and anxiety stem from self-criticism. And I think like also with that, like even though I'd heard it several times before, like for some reason, like I remember that as being like the time that the light bulb went off. And it was a moment where I really started to look even deeper inward. Like I have had depression struggles for as long as I can remember, and some like pretty intense bouts of anxiety. And I started seeing this as my insomnia experience is like sort of an offshoot as a lot of that, and all the self-criticism that I've put on myself for so long, and started learning to recognize that was the source of a lot of my suffering.
Yeah. Wow. As you said that, I was like, oh, wow, this is so nice. And I was like, mental note, I'm going to tell Cisse, she's going to be so happy to hear that her message had an impact on you. Now, when we first hear about self-kindness, very often we think, oh, that's some fluffy, like woo-woo concept that I need something like tangible. This is a real struggle I have. But oftentimes we see with time that self-kindness is so helpful. It's one of the most helpful things ever, And so for somebody who's like maybe hears this and goes like, I don't know about self-kindness. Is that really helpful? And how to arrive there? Any things that you could share that may be helpful for that person?
It's hard. It's like weirdly hard to approach, I think, especially in like the Western world, we're taught to like fix things all the time. We're not like sort of grown like into a culture that just allows us to allow things to be hard. And like, I mean, I don't want to say that like this insomnia experience was sort of the thing that like really woke me up, but I don't know that I would accept self-kindness as a solution to the problem very easily if I hadn't like if I like had a choice. Cause like with insomnia, you don't really have a choice. Like you just have to go through it. Like having to go through it was the thing that kind of like made me see, I think. Maybe not. Maybe I would have like seen the lessons of self-kindness through different ways or different experiences. But I think it really like solidified that lesson for me. And for anybody who might be like struggling with that, like maybe just like start looking inward and asking yourself questions. And when you are experiencing anxiety or depression or other types of suffering, like start really asking yourself like why and where is that coming from, and start digging deep and asking yourself if you are just not giving yourself enough grace.
Yeah. I think so often we can hear people talk about self-criticism, but we don't recognize it. We're like, oh, but I'm nice to myself. Like I take care of myself. I go running and go to the spa every now and then. But for me, something that I think about a lot is these like questions we have for ourselves that can sound like just open-ended exploratory questions, but that really are kind of self-critical, which is things like, why can't I get this? What's wrong with me? Everybody else is doing fine. Why am I the only one not doing well? And things of that nature. Like it sounds like open-ended questions, but they're kind of masked self-criticism in a way, because what we're saying is like, when we're saying like, what's wrong with me? We're saying like, there is something wrong with me. I just haven't figured out why, right? Or that can be something that can be helpful to see, to kind of recognize our self-criticism. Like thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean that is like the experience that I had going through my insomnia recovery, and that so many other people in the in the program had, it was like kind of like everybody had such similar thoughts about not being able like to get through it, or being afraid of being the one who can't get through it because there's something unique about you that doesn't allow you to like move past this thing. And I believed that about myself for a while. I thought, you know, I can't do this. I have no choice. Like, this is my option at this point. So I have to see what happens on the other side. But like, oh, I just lost my train of thought. But yeah.
It's more like the kind of like recognizing self-criticism can be tricky sometimes, right? But
yeah, I did see a lot of what I was experiencing as self-criticism of like just not being strong enough, or this or that, or like not being able to pick up the teachings. But like, okay, Jamie, like, why don't you think that you can? Like, I always I think another thing that a lot of students say is that like deep down, like they know they're going to be okay at the end of the day, and they just don't really want to go through the thing that they have to go through. And I think that rang true as well.
yeah. And remind me, did you go through like a move during the time of the immunity program? Yeah. I remember you talk about this kind of a challenge, or how did that go?
Yeah. I remember talking about it with you, and I think Coach Michelle as well. How I was living in Colorado for like 9 years at that point, and I was ready to be on the East Coast, closer to family, for like a couple of years at that point. And I thought, like, well, like one of the thoughts that I had was, well, like insomnia is going to thwart that. And I remember that belief being challenged by y'all. And I came across a job opening with my current employer that was based in Massachusetts. And I looked at it and I was like, I'm applying for this job. I'm going to get this job. And I did. And so I called my parents and they helped me move, you know, like 2/3 of the way across the country. And I was like, we were driving for like 10 hours a day, maybe. And so like there was some pressure on myself to like, you know, be well rested enough to get through this drive. But I think my parents being there was just such a great comfort, and I really appreciate them for helping me out. And yeah, we got through that 4-day trip, and it was a slog, but we did it. And I came here and I settled in, and it's taking me a while to settle in still, because this is such a different part of the country, and it takes a while to build roots. And the whole thing was just kind of scary in that regard as well. But part of it was also just that I had to show myself that I could. And I think that was a huge step.
Yeah. Wow. Very well. Now, I wanted to ask you maybe 3 more questions. 2 of them are like my kind of standard last questions, but I have one more question about your journey, which was from, let's say, 2019 and to 2023 or so. You didn't. It seems like there was no big struggle with sleep, but was it that sleep had kind of completely fallen off the radar and it was not even something you thought about? Or was it more like this kind of truth situation that you had little efforts, little things going on?
Yeah, I was just thinking of the word truce as you were asking that question, because I'm pretty sure that describes the situation pretty well. Because I remember thinking like, well, like this isn't a problem because I'm not experiencing the problem. I'm not experiencing the insomnia. But if it happens again, I can just do sleep restriction again. And so like I had that sort of like solution in my head that kind of put my head at ease for the time being anyway. And so, yeah, I would say it was definitely a truce period.
Okay, got it. All right, now, if you could, travel back in time to when this struggle started, and you could tell you something that you know now, what would you tell yourself?
I think I would tell myself the same thing that I told myself, I think, the whole time. I remember one night in 2019 when I was doing my stimulus control, I was like getting up and doing my puzzle and then going back to sleep and then getting up and doing my puzzle. And I remember having the thought like this is like because like I spent so much time like believing that I couldn't get back to normal or find my way back to normal. I remember having the thought that like, this is silly. Of course I can sleep. Of course I can sleep normally. I'll always have the ability to just like have peaceful sleep. Or like that a possibility always exists. And I just have to find my way there. And I think when you're going through it, you really believe that there's no way there. Or you think that there's no way there. Maybe deep down you know it, but like you don't believe it. And so I think I would just tell myself that again and again, like there's always another side.
Yeah.
Together.
Very nice. And finally, you touched upon this, but I want to ask you to expand on this or to share some thoughts on this, which is, did you learn things, going through the struggle with sleep that have been helpful in other areas of life?
Yeah. I mean, like I mentioned, it's given me a new perspective on some other mental health challenges that I have been dealing with my whole life. And I'm still sort of learning how to apply those lessons, I think. But I see things so differently now. Like, and I remember so much more quickly that all my feelings are temporary. And that like there's always going to be an equilibrium at the end of the day, that maybe not at the end of the day, maybe at the end of the month or the end of the year or something, but ultimately there's going to be balance again. Like it's like when I do my like meditations, they always talk about the sky like always being blue even if there's weather or bad weather specifically. And I think that like that thread just carries through to everything and makes it easier for me to digest what I'm going through and understand why I'm going through it. And just I'm able to be more graceful with myself.
Yeah, no, wonderfully said. Wow. Okay, so yeah, we'll conclude there. Jamie, it was super nice having you. Thanks so much for sharing this, and be in touch.
All right, thanks, Daniel.
Anytime. Bye, everyone.
Hi, it's me, Coach Daniel, and I hope you found the video you just saw full of inspirational content and full of educational content as well, because that's really what we try to do here in the school. We try to educate and inspire. And if you're finding that things are clicking for you and sleep is happening easier and you're leaving the struggle, please let us know in the comment section, because we live for that. We live for hearing how somebody is finding sleep and life becoming lighter and easier. And not only are you doing us a huge favor as sleep coaches and like filling our tank with that gas that makes us never want to stop doing this, but you're also helping the community. You're helping by inspiring other people, and by commenting, you're telling YouTube that this was interesting, and YouTube feeds our content to more people so that they can discover our teachings and things get easier for them. So again, if you found things getting easier for you, please let us know in the comment section. We can't wait to hear from you.